Don't sign it." Those 3 words stopped the room, not gradually and not one person at a time, but all of it at exactly the same moment. 26 people, 12 lawyers, 6 regional directors, 2 notaries, every whispered conversation and every rustling paper froze as though someone had reached in and switched off all sound and movement at once. She was standing in the service doorway at the back of the 43rd floor conference suite, wearing a dark navy uniform with brass buttons and the Heron Tower crest on her breast pocket. She was the housekeeper, and she had just told the most feared man in South Korea not to sign a document in front of his lawyers, his directors, and his wife. Chairman Kang Joon-ho had not moved. The Mont Blanc pen was still uncapped in his hand, with the nib hovering above the signature line and the tattoos on his forearms catching the conference room light. Black dragons coiling up his right arm and a tiger frozen mid-leap on his left. His face revealed nothing, and his eyes had not left the woman in the doorway. There was something nobody in that room ever spoke about, and something nobody in any room had dared to raise in 23 years. Chairman Kang Joon-ho could not read. Not a learning failure and not a gap in his education. Dyslexia, the kind that turns letters into noise and makes a page of text look like a code designed specifically to exclude you. He had built an empire worth billions around it and surrounded himself with people whose job was to translate the written world into one he could navigate, and he had never once let it show in a room that mattered. Someone in that room had known this, had always known, and had spent 12 years being patient and trusted and never once suspected while quietly building a plan around that one private fact. The document on the table was that plan. Every asset he had ever built, every account, everything he owned was signed away in language he could not read and prepared by the one person in the world he had never thought to question. He had never needed to know what was in it because he had always trusted her to tell him. Until today. Until a woman in a housekeeper's uniform stepped into that doorway and refused to move. Remove her. Madame Seo Yeonji's voice was controlled and perfectly dangerously controlled in the way of a woman who had everything riding on the next 10 seconds and would not let it show. Her arm was stretched across the room with one finger aimed directly at the doorway and her other hand pressed flat against her husband's back, and her eyes were burning. Remove her right now. Nobody moved. They were all watching the chairman. The pen was still in his hand and the signature line was still blank, and the woman in the doorway had not taken a single step back. In the silence of a room full of powerful people, waiting to find out which way the most powerful person in it was going to fall, Chairman Kang Joon-ho slowly lifted his eyes from the housekeeper and turned to look at his wife. Something moved across Yeonji's face, something small and involuntary that she could not stop and could not retrieve. The pen was still in his hand. Nobody breathed. New episodes of our Korean Billionaire Mafia series drop every week. Subscribe and hit the bell and don't miss what happens next. She had been watching his wife for 11 days before she found the proof. But to understand how a housekeeper ended up in a 43rd floor conference suite telling a billionaire mafia chairman not to sign his own name, and to understand why every lawyer and director in that room went silent instead of having her removed, you have to go back 6 weeks. You have to go back to a Tuesday morning in early autumn when a woman arrived at a service entrance with one suitcase, a letter of recommendation, and a quality of stillness that every single person in that building would spend the next 5 months underestimating. Nadia Owusu arrived at the Heron Tower residence on a Tuesday in early autumn. She was 31 years old, born in Kumasi, Ghana, and the daughter of a mathematics teacher and a seamstress who could price fabric with a single glance and never be wrong. Numbers were Nadia's mother tongue before Korean ever was. She had spent 4 years studying economics at the University of Ghana and won a postgraduate scholarship in corporate finance and contract law at Yonsei University, and graduated in the top 3% of her program, and had been 3 weeks from accepting a position at a Seoul law firm when a single financial decision that was not hers but her brother's, made in desperation and covered by her savings and flagged by a background check, had redirected her life entirely. She did not lead with this. She had learned that people were more comfortable with a version of her they could hold easily. At Heron Tower, she was the housekeeper, efficient and quiet and invisible. This was useful. Invisible. People hear everything. She met Chairman Kang Joon-ho on her 3rd morning. He walked into the kitchen at 6:44 wearing a training shirt with the sleeves cut off, and the tattoo stopped her half a second longer than she had planned. A full sleeve of black ink on his right arm, dragons and lotus blossoms rendered with the density of a man who had turned his body into a record of everything he had survived. On his left arm, a tiger, mid-leap, with its eyes carrying the specific ferocity of something constrained that is always calculating release. He caught her looking. She did not look away. "You're the new one," he said. "Nadia. Started Monday, Chairman." He looked at the ledger open on the counter in front of her. "What's wrong with it?" "3 figures in the last quarter don't reconcile with the delivery receipts. 430,001. Probably a data entry error, but I wanted to verify before I take over ordering." He made his coffee without another word and left. At the door, he paused. "Fix whatever needs fixing." She circled the figures. She noted that he had not asked how she knew and had not questioned her competence and had simply registered the information and moved. She filed this. It was the first of many things she filed about Chairman Kang Joon-ho. The second and the third and the fourth were all about his wife. 2 weeks into her employment on a Thursday evening, she was restocking the 4th-floor corridor linen closet when she heard Madame Seo Yeonji's voice through the study door. She would have kept walking. She was not a person who stopped at doors. But the tone stopped her before the words did. That particular register of someone speaking to an equal about a plan that is already in motion. The signing is scheduled for the 14th. Yeonji's voice was precise and unhurried. "Everything is in place. He won't question it because he never questions anything I present, and that has been true for 12 years. Make sure the Jeju certificates are filed before then. Once he signs the power of attorney, the transfer has to be immediate. We cannot give his lawyers time to look." A male voice on the other end. Nadia could not hear words, only the tone, which was affirmative and businesslike. "He doesn't read," Yeonji continued. "He has never read. That is the only fact that matters." The call ended, and footsteps moved toward the door. Nadia was already 2 steps down the corridor with linen in her arms and moving at her exact normal pace when the study door opened. She did not look back. She heard Yeonji's heels and then the elevator and then silence. She put the towels on the correct shelf and closed the linen closet door and stood in the quiet corridor and let her mind run at full speed. Power of attorney. The 14th. Jeju certificates. A transfer that had to be immediate. He doesn't read. Said like a tool. Said like a key that had been cut years ago and kept in a pocket. Patient, waiting for the right lock. She needed something on paper. She needed a document she could hold in her hands and put in front of him. A phone call was not enough because a phone call was her word against his wife's, and his wife had 12 years of trust and Nadia had 6 days. She went back to work and she waited. This was the part that cost her. Not the fear of being wrong because she was not wrong and she was certain of that. Not the risk of losing the job because she had weighed that and accepted it. What cost her was the waiting itself, knowing what she knew. Walking past the chairman every morning and handing him coffee and saying nothing. Watching Yeonji move through the residence with the elegant ease of a woman who believed she had already won. Carrying the weight of what she knew alone and trusting, because there was nothing else left to trust that the right moment would arrive and she would recognize it. It arrived on a Friday on the 43rd floor with the pen already in his hand and the ink already at the page and the empire already one breath from gone. And Nadia already at the door. She had been watching and waiting, and now she knew. The question was never whether she would act. The question was only when, and whether the when would be soon enough. The document appeared 9 days later, and with it came the most dangerous 11 minutes of Nadia's time at Heron Tower. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The chairman was in the tower. Yeonji had left for a lunch in Apgujeong that was scheduled to last until 4. Nadia was in the private library on the 3rd floor for her assigned twice-weekly cleaning, and she had been dusting shelves she had begun to take longer over than necessary because the room was the most honest space in the building. A man who could not read surrounded by thousands of books, and both things absolutely true and neither of them a contradiction. The folder was behind the cushion of the reading chair, cream-colored and plain and bearing the embossed crest of a law firm whose name Nadia recognized before she had fully registered that she was recognizing it. She had written 40 pages about a case involving this firm during her postgraduate study. It specialized in one thing above almost all others, which was the irrevocable transfer of high-value assets under power of attorney. She opened it. 12 pages. She read them in 8 minutes. Every asset category was covered and every account was included. The transfer was irrevocable under Korean civil law with an explicit 5-year contestation waiver. The beneficiary was Shinwon Asset Partners and the registration number was in the footer. She had seen that number. 11 days ago, the day before the phone call, she had pulled a memo from the wastebasket in this room before shredding. She had held it for only seconds. The registration number in the header had passed through her eyes and settled in the part of her mind where numbers lived permanently. That memo had been signed by a name she had seen in Korean financial news for 2 years, always in the same context, which was the Bayek organization, the Heron Syndicate's most dangerous rival, a decade of dismantling attempts. And here was the thread pulled all the way through and ending in a document behind a cushion 3 feet from where she was standing. Then she heard the elevator. Her body moved before her mind finished the calculation. Folder behind the cushion at the same angle and same depth. Across to the bookshelf she was supposed to be dusting with the cloth in hand, and at the second shelf from the top when the library door opened. Yeonji, 3 hours early, still in her lunch clothes, pale cream blouse, and dark trousers with her hair perfect. She stopped when she saw Nadia. "I wasn't expecting anyone in here." "Wednesday cleaning schedule, madam. I can come back." Yeonji's eyes moved around the room, across the shelves and the desk and the reading chair. They moved the way eyes move when they are checking rather than looking, not curious, but calculating. Nadia kept dusting with the focused, unhurried attention of someone thinking about nothing except dust. "Finish up," Yeonji said, and crossed to the reading chair and sat. She crossed her legs and took out her phone and did not reach behind the cushion. 11 minutes. Nadia worked through them shelf by shelf with her hands perfectly steady and her mind perfectly loud. When she gathered her supplies and moved to the door, Yeonji spoke without looking up. "You're doing well, Nadia. The chairman mentioned the kitchen figures. Thank you, madam." She left and walked past the elevator to the service stairwell and stood with her back against the concrete wall for 60 seconds with her eyes on the ceiling, breathing through the specific kind of fear that is not panic, but its more professional cousin, the fear that sharpens rather than freezes. Then she went back to work and started building a plan. She tried to tell him on Thursday morning and nearly lost everything. She had been awake since 4. She had written down the registration number and the memo date and the law firm name and the key clauses. She had a single sheet of paper in her apron pocket when he came into the kitchen at 6:44. She waited until he had taken his first sip of coffee. "Chairman, I need to speak with you about something urgent. Something in the household documents that I believe requires your attention before Friday." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Urgent?" "Yes, Chairman. Then put it in writing and give it to Minji. She'll find time." His phone was already in his hand, and the conversation for him was already over. Nadia stood with the paper in her pocket and felt the trap close around her. Minji had been the chairman's assistant for 7 years, and Minji reported to Yeonji on all household matters. Anything Nadia gave Minji would be in Yeonji's hands within the hour, and whatever came after that would not be a meeting. It would be a dismissal that was fast and clean, and the document behind the cushion would be back in circulation, and the 14th would come and the pen would go down. Every channel he had, including directors and security and the legal team, had been touched by Yeonji's hands over 12 years. 3 of his 4 legal partners had been recommended by her personally. His security team's monthly evaluations ran through her office. The system had been designed to be total. There was one option left. Nadia had to wait until the pen was already in his hand in a room full of witnesses at a moment so undeniable that no channel and no intermediary and no managed version of events could contain it. She spent Thursday preparing. She memorized the clauses and the numbers and the name. She located the service entrance to the 43rd floor conference suite, which was accessible from the catering corridor and required a staff access card she already carried. She slept 3 hours. She was in the kitchen at 5:45. When the chairman came down at 6:44, she handed him his coffee and said nothing. She looked at his face, the tattoos and the controlled tiredness, and the man 2 hours from being destroyed, and she kept every word she had behind her teeth. She needed the room first. She needed the witnesses. She needed the moment to be permanent. She watched him leave for the tower. She folded her apron. She counted the hours down to 0. In the conference room in the silence after Yeonji's admission, Junho did not move for a long time. Then he placed the document on the table and he placed Nadia's handwritten notes beside it. She had produced them from her apron pocket, 3 pages and precise, and he looked at his wife the way he looked at problems he was about to dismantle completely. 12 years, he said. Yes, the Jeju certificates, the Busan restructuring in 2021, the Changwon partnership that fell through. Yeonji did not flinch, not all of those, the last 2 years primarily. The organization was patient, so was I. Why? Not a question, a space he was making. She looked at him steadily. Her composure was still intact, not as a defense now, but as the only language she had left. Because I spent 12 years being the person who understood everything about your world and existed in none of it. I knew your accounts and your fears and the name of the laundry where your mother worked. I knew what it cost you to sit in rooms full of lawyers and wait for someone to translate the page. She paused. And you never once knew me. Not one thing. Not my fear or my boredom or what I wanted from a life that had been permanently arranged around your limitation. She let the word stand. The Bayek organization found that useful. I decided to find it useful back. Junho was silent. Something moved him through his face that was not hurt and not anger, but the specific expression of a man who has received a true thing and is deciding what to do with its truth. I am not sorry for what I wanted, Yeonji said. I am sorry for the method. She looked at Nadia. The look between them was not hostility. It was the complicated recognition of 2 women who had both been invisible in the same house at the same time in entirely different ways. Then Yeonji stood and smoothed her jacket and walked to the elevator without being asked. The doors closed. Junho sat in the silence for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down." Nadia sat. "Walk me through it," he said. "From the beginning, everything." She did. The linen closet and the phone call and the folder behind the cushion and Yeonji, walking in 3 hours early and the sheet of paper in her apron pocket and Minji and the reason she had waited until the pen was already in his hand. She spoke for 9 minutes without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet again. Then he said, "You could have gone to any of my directors. Your director's household. Authorizations run through your wife's office. Security. Monthly evaluations through her office and 3 of your 4 legal partners recommended by her personally over the past 7 years. She held his gaze. There was no channel to you that she had not touched. That was the design. He stared at her. So you waited until the pen was in my hand. Yes. Knowing that if you were wrong, you were finished. Yes. Why? He leaned forward and the tiger on his arm shifted with the movement. You have been here 6 weeks. Why risk everything you had built here for a man you barely know? Nadia did not answer immediately. She gave the question the full weight it deserved. Because you are a person, she said. Not a chairman and not a balance sheet, but a person. And someone was using the most private thing about you, the shape your mind takes, and the thing you were born with, and that you have built an empire around and never let anyone use against you, and they were using it to destroy everything. You are. She looked at him directly. I could not know that and say nothing. That is not something I am capable of. He looked at her for a very long time. No one, he said, has ever described it that way. In my entire life. I know, she said, simply, without pride, without performance. And that simplicity, the absence of the thing she could have made of the moment and chose not to, was what settled in him like a key finding the lock it was made for. The dismantling was fast and total. His Busan lawyer, Choi, a man who had known Junho since both of them were young and doing things they had since become too powerful to answer for, was in the building within 24 hours. Every document Yeonji had ever presented was reviewed within the week. The audit uncovered 4 years of small diversions, nothing individually catastrophic, and everything calibrated to sit beneath the threshold of scrutiny. Patient work. The work of someone who had studied her target across a decade and understood that small, consistent pressure applied at the right points was more reliable than a single dramatic move. The power of attorney was voided the same day it had almost been signed because Junho had made the call from the elevator before he had even changed out of the suit he had worn to the signing. The Jeju certificates were suspended. The holding company Shinwan Asset Partners was flagged with the Financial Services Commission under a filing that made the ownership chain impossible to obscure and was worded carefully enough that Yeonji's name did not appear in anything that would reach the press before the settlement was finalized. She did not contest any of it. She had a lawyer who was very good and very quiet, and who negotiated a settlement that was generous in the way that settlements are generous, when one party has been comprehensively caught and the other party wants the matter resolved before it becomes a story. By the end of the second week, the legal architecture of 12 years of careful betrayal had been taken apart at every joint. She was gone by the 11th day. One suitcase and 2 garment bags, and the cream blouse replaced by something dark and compact. Nadia watched from a third-floor window as she walked to the car with the spine of a woman who had made her decisions and would not revisit them. The car turned out of the tower's underground exit and disappeared into the Gangnam traffic, and that was that. Nadia did not feel triumph. She felt something closer to sorrow, not for the betrayal, but for the 12 years before it. For the woman who had been the most capable person in every room she occupied and had been given the title of wife instead of the authority she had actually been performing. For the specific loneliness of being indispensable and invisible at the same time. She said none of this aloud. It was not her sorrow to display, but she held it privately for a moment before she went back to work. The household rearranged itself around the absence the way water rearranges around a removed stone, quickly and quietly as if it had always been waiting for the space. And in the rearrangement, something shifted in the chairman that Nadia began to notice before she had words for it. He was less managed and less performed. The specific quality of careful presentation that powerful men carry like a second skin, the control of expression and the calibration of distance, and the practiced economy of everything they allow to show, began in small daily increments to thin. Not because he had lost anything, but because something had been taken off. Because the version of himself he had assembled partly in response to the need to be unreadable to the person who had been reading him for 12 years was now structurally unnecessary. He began staying in the kitchen longer in the mornings. It started without announcement as the natural exit point of the interaction simply began to extend. He would stand at the counter with his coffee and look through the window at Seoul still finding its morning light, and she would work through her tasks, and the silence between them would slowly become inhabited rather than empty. There is a difference between silence that waits for something to fill it and silence that is already full. The kitchen was becoming the second kind. "Your father," he said one morning, 11 days after Yeonji had gone. He had clearly been holding this since an earlier conversation. Mathematics teacher. He believed every problem had a solution if you were willing to stay with it long enough. He used to make us sit with unsolved problems overnight before he would help. He said the work the mind does while you're sleeping is the most honest work it does. Junho was quiet for a moment. Then he said my mother couldn't read either. He said it the way someone says something that has never been said out loud before. Not with difficulty, but with the slight unsteadiness of an object shifted from the place it has always stood. She told everyone she had bad eyes. She worked in a laundry in Incheon. She was the most capable person I have ever known in my life. And she died in a small apartment with nothing, and the entire street came to her funeral. More people than came to the opening of my first tower. Nadia looked at him. She was rich in the ways that last, she said. You built what you built because of her. I think she knew. Something moved in his face, not softening and not breaking, but opening the way a locked room opens when the right key is finally used. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee, and at the door he paused and said without looking back, "You can use the library whenever it isn't in use. The books are not being used." He was gone before she answered. She stood in the kitchen and understood that the sentence had cost him something. She filed it in the part of her that was careful with things that cost people something. She began, using the library. He was always there in the evenings. The first time he found her at the corner desk, he stopped in the doorway and she looked up and said she could use a different room, and he said he had told her she could use the library and sat in his usual chair. They spent an hour without speaking. It was, Junho noted with the part of his mind that noticed everything, one of the least uncomfortable hours he had experienced in a long time. Neither of them mentioned that it was becoming a pattern. They simply let it become one. 3 weeks after Yeonji's departure, a well-dressed man arrived at the service entrance at 9 in the morning with a florist delivery box and Nadia's name. Security guard Wu, 11 years at Heron Tower and carrying the specific instincts of someone who had survived 11 years in that particular employment, held the man at the entrance and called upstairs. Nadia came down. The man smiled. From an admirer, someone who appreciates your particular skill set. She did not touch the box. I don't know you. No, but we know you. His smile held. You are an intelligent woman in a dangerous position. We want to offer you options, financial options, considerably more generous than a housekeeper's salary. He set the box on the counter. There's a number inside. We simply want to talk. Who is we? He adjusted his jacket lapel, casual and deliberate. The shoulder holster beneath was visible for exactly 2 seconds, informational and not threatening, a credential. People who compensate talent appropriately, he said. Good morning. He left. Wu's hand was already on his radio. Nadia picked up the box without opening it and carried it upstairs. Jun-ho was on the 4th floor balcony. She set the box on the table in front of him and reported everything in precise sequence. His expression did not change while she spoke, which she had learned meant he was thinking very hard. He showed you the weapon, Jun-ho said. Yes, that was not a threat. That was a credential. They want you to know they're serious. He turned the box over in his hands. They're recruiting you. Why are you here instead of calling the number? She looked at him with the direct gaze he had come to recognize as her version of emphasis. Because that is not a question you need to ask me. Something moved in his face, fuller than the fractional twitch she had seen before, and more real. He set the box down. You are now a target, he said, with his voice flat in the way it was when he was managing something he felt strongly about. They don't approach people they intend to leave alone. You said no, and they will come back differently. I know. I'm assigning you a security detail. Not negotiable. You're in this because of me. He paused. The detail will be discreet. You're concerned, she said. I am strategic, he replied. He did not quite meet her eyes. She decided not to press the distinction. She left him on the balcony with the flower box and the city, and the tiger on his arm watching both. By evening, she had a 4-person rotation, a maintenance worker and a delivery driver and a cafe regular, and a woman who jogged her rest day route. The Bayek organization saw the detail within 48 hours. They did not approach her again. The message had been received. The housekeeper was no longer available. She was protected. She was, though Jun-ho would never use the phrase aloud, something he had decided to keep. The library was where the armor finally came off. Not in one moment and not dramatically, but in the way that armor comes off when someone has been consistently and reliably safe to be around. Gradually and piece by piece in the evenings, by lamplight over the turning of pages. She read to him for the first time on a Tuesday in October. He had come in with a contract renewal and sat in his chair and held the document with the closed-door expression she now recognized. Not frustration, but the specific quality of a person, confronting something that will not open for them. She crossed the room without being asked and took it from him. She read it the way she read everything, clearly and at pace and without ornamentation and without the careful, patient voice that is really just a performance of helping. She read it as a colleague, professionally and completely, as though there were nothing about the situation that required special treatment or particular delicacy. When she finished, she said the arbitration clause in Section 9 designates a single arbitrator appointed by the counterparty. Mutual appointment, or you lose every dispute by default. My legal team approved this. Your legal team is very good and occasionally sloppy on what they assume you won't check. She looked at him. You should check more. I can help you check more. The corner of his mouth moved. The first time she had seen it move that way, not the fractional twitch, but something with more of him in it. You're telling me how to run my legal department. I'm telling you what I see. What you do with it is your business. He was quiet. The lamplight was warm and specific, the kind that makes a room feel like a conversation rather than a space. You have a full analysis of corporate contract law in your head. From studying? Yes. And you've been applying it to grocery ledgers. I apply what I know to whatever is in front of me. That is what you do with what you know. You don't save it for more important occasions. You use it fully on everything, or it atrophies. He sat with this for a moment. It was the kind of statement that contained something beyond its surface, and he was a man who noticed those. Then he looked at her with the full focused attention he gave to things he was trying to understand completely, the same attention he gave to financial structures and tactical problems. What happened before this? What took you from Yonsei to a service entrance? She was quiet, not dreading it exactly, but aware of the weight of the answer and the fact that once given it would change the nature of what was between them. Not for worse, she thought, but irrevocably. My brother was in debt, she said. Serious debt, to people who were not patient about it. I had savings I had been building since I arrived in Seoul. I used them. Then my job offer at the law firm was contingent on a financial background check that flagged the account movement. They withdrew the offer. She was matter of fact, not performing stoicism, but just reporting the way she reported everything. I had been in Seoul for 2 years. I had a student visa converting to a work visa that was now void. I had 3 weeks before I had to leave the country or find employment that would support a new visa application. She looked at the shelves. The agency placed me here within the week. Junho was quiet for a moment. Your brother, is he all right? She looked at him. The question surprised her, not its content, but its priority. He had asked about her. Brother first before anything else and before logistics or timelines or the pragmatics of what she had lost. He had asked about her brother. He is, she said, and something in her voice was softer for a second before she recalibrated it. He started a small business in Kumasi. Textiles. He learned something from watching our mother, it turns out. He calls every Sunday without fail. Junho nodded. He looked at the window. Seoul held its autumn darkness. I did the same thing, he said, before the syndicate and before any of it. I borrowed money I couldn't repay from people who were not patient about it to keep my mother in the apartment after my father left. She didn't know. I told her a relative had helped. He paused. That debt is what brought me into the work. The first job, the first thing I did that I couldn't undo, and everything after that was built on that first thing the way all structures are built on their foundations, whether the foundation is good or not. They sat with this, for a moment, the parallel and the mirror, and the way the same impulse and the same love expressed in the same action had taken two people to completely different places. One to an empire and one to a linen closet. And both of them in this room now, which was either a coincidence or the kind of thing that only looks like a coincidence. The difference, Nadia said quietly, is that your path built an empire and mine built a cleaning schedule. He turned to look at her. The difference, he said, is that you still have your brother. Cleanly. Without what I paid and without the shape of what I became in order to repay what I owed. His voice carried something that was not regret exactly, but its more honest and more settled relative. The acknowledgement of a cost that has been accepted without being wished away. That is not nothing. That is in some ways the thing I would trade the most for. She looked at him for a long time. No, she said finally, it is not nothing. They sat in the library and let the parallel be true without resolving it into a lesson or a consolation. They let it be two stories, both of them real, and the room warm enough to hold both. It was, Nadia thought, the most honest conversation she had had in years. Not because of what was revealed, because she had told the story before to herself and to her brother and to the ceiling at 4 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. But because of the quality of attention with which it had been received. He had listened the way he did everything that mattered, completely and without dividing his attention and without waiting for the part that was relevant to him. He had listened to the whole thing. She filed this too in the part of her that was careful with things that mattered. This was the thing about Kang Junho that accumulated quietly over the weeks and that she had not entirely anticipated. He paid attention. Full and undivided and unglamorous attention. Not only to the things that were useful to him, because he did that of course, and that was simply how his mind worked, but to the things around the useful things. The texture of what people said and the weight of what they didn't. He was underneath the armor and the empire and the ink, a man who had been paying precise attention to the world his entire life and had never until recently had anyone pay the same attention back to him. She had started doing it without deciding to. It was simply how she was with people, fully present and fully attending in the same measure with everyone. The kitchen assistant who dropped things and was afraid of being fired and never said so. The night security guard who had worked 11 years and had excellent opinions about Korean film that no one ever asked for. The chairman who came to the kitchen before dawn and stood at the counter with his coffee and occasionally and carefully said something real. She attended to all of them the same way. This was agape in practice, not a grand gesture and not a declaration and not a sacrifice. just full presence, full attention. The radical decision to treat every person in front of you as someone whose inner life is as complex and worthy as your own. Jun-ho had figured this out eventually. He had watched her with the staff and had seen her stop what she was doing to help someone who didn't ask. He had observed with the analytical precision that was simply how he processed the world that she was not treating him differently from the housekeeper who had been there 12 years or the junior assistant who had been there 12 weeks. He was not an exception. He was included in something larger. This, he discovered, was the thing that undid him most completely. Not that she was kind to him, but that she was kind in the same measure and quality to everyone. He was not special to her. He was simply a person, one of the people in her world that she treated as fully real. He had never been just a person before. He had been a chairman and a threat and a resource and an obstacle and an asset and a liability. He had been feared and courted and managed and tolerated and occasionally and cynically loved for what he represented. He had never been simply included in someone's general care for the world. He found himself in the quiet of the mornings and the library evenings wanting to deserve it. Not to earn it because it was not earnable, and he understood that now, and that was the whole point of it. But to become the kind of person whose name sat comfortably in the company of the people she extended herself to. To be worth being looked at fully. He had spent 23 years making himself powerful enough that no one could afford to look away from him. He was now for the first time trying to become someone worth looking at for an entirely different reason. He caught himself being more patient in meetings and asking questions he would previously have dismissed, and looking occasionally and then more frequently at the people around him as people rather than variables in a system he was managing. She was not trying to change him. She had no project. She was simply present every day with the same quality of attention and the same absence of agenda. And her presence was doing something to the architecture of who he was without either of them planning it. He thought about his mother. He thought about what she had known and what she had never been given credit for knowing, and whether she would recognize him now, not the chairman and not the syndicate and not the tattoos or the empire, but just the man. Whether she would see the boy she had loved in the man he was trying to become. He thought she might. The offer came the following week. I want to change your role. He said it the moment he sat down with the directness that was his natural mode and no preamble. Independent legal reviewer. No loyalty to my team and no interest in the outcome except accuracy. 4 times your current salary. Why now? Because the Jeju property certificates that Yeonji filed as part of the power of attorney setup were reviewed by my legal team 6 months ago and cleared. They should not have cleared. 2 title irregularities. You would have found them in an afternoon. He held her gaze. I have a gap in my defenses. You are the precise shape of what fills it. She studied him. You also feel responsible for the Bayek organization targeting me. Yes. No qualification and no management, just yes. This honesty that was bare and undefended had been growing in him since the conference room. It was not the same as his natural directness. It was something underneath directness. The specific quality of a person who had decided at a fundamental level to stop managing how he appeared. All right, she said. One condition. I report directly to you and not through Minji and not through the legal team lead. Direct line and closed loop and no channel that existed before me. She looked at him. Given recent history, he almost smiled. It was the closest he had come yet, fuller than before and real enough that she noted it in the careful part of herself. Direct line, he said. Closed loop, done. He tapped the contract folder on the table between them. I'll need an office, already being arranged. Bookshelves, obviously. She turned a page. He opened his contracts. The library held them both in its warm light and asked nothing of either of them. November arrived in Seoul with a cold that turned the Han River the color of pewter and made the city look in the early mornings like a memory of itself. Nadia had been in her new office for 3 weeks. She had flagged 4 problems in the legal team's work, and the lead attorney now answered her questions within the hour. She had also, without being asked, compiled a structural analysis of the Bayek organization's financial operations, public filings, and pattern recognition, and the sloppiness in their Jeju subsidiary documents that told you exactly where their pressure points were. She brought it to Jun-ho on a Thursday morning. He had it read to him in silence. When she finished the last page, he sat with his hands flat on the desk and his eyes on the window. This is better intelligence on the Bayek organization, he said. than my actual intelligence operation has produced in 8 months. They've been careless with their Jeju filings. Sloppiness tells you where the pressure is." He looked at her. Something had shifted in his face, not the expression he wore in meetings or negotiations, and not the chairman's expression, but the one underneath it. "What do you want?" he said. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "You've been here 5 months. You protected me and corrected my legal team and produced strategic intelligence on my primary enemy. You have not asked for a single thing that wasn't directly offered." He turned fully to face her. "I have built my entire life on understanding what people want. I cannot read you, and I need to understand why." She thought about this with genuine consideration. "I want my brother to keep calling on Sundays," she said. "I want the Busan arbitration clause fixed before the renewal deadline. I want to finish the Goryeo dynasty history in the library because I am at a very interesting section." She paused. "And I want you to be all right. I want the organization you built to survive the people trying to take it. I want the work I do to be useful." She looked at him steadily. "That is all of it. That is genuinely all of it." He was quiet for a long time. "My mother used to say the most dangerous thing in the world was someone who loved you for free," he said. His voice was different from its usual register, quieter, and underneath the quiet, carrying something with the specific quality of a thing being said for the first time outside of one's own head. She meant it as a warning. She had been badly hurt by people who gave with both hands and then presented a bill she had never agreed to. She said there is no such thing as a free gift. There is only a gift whose cost you don't know yet. He paused. I took that as the operating principle of my entire adult life. I built the syndicate on it, and I built every relationship I have ever had on it. Every kindness has a structure underneath it. Every gift is a debt in different clothing. Every person who moves toward you is calculating something even if they don't know it themselves. Nadia looked at him and said nothing. She let him have the space. You have taken that principle apart, he said, not by arguing with it and not in some single dramatic moment, but by simply being what you are. Every morning and every evening and in the library and in this office and in every room you have walked through in this building for 5 months without once using your access to me as anything except what you said it was. He held her gaze with the full intensity that was his natural mode when something mattered. I don't have good language for what I feel. I am not a man who has practiced feeling things that cannot be immediately acted on because I find them imprecise and I find them uncomfortable. But I know that when you are not in this building, something in it is structurally wrong the way a room is wrong when something has been removed and you can't immediately name what. And I know that when you read to me, I understand the words in a way that goes beyond the understanding of words, as though the meaning is arriving through the quality of your attention rather than just the text. And I know that when I think about who I am today compared to who I was the morning before you walked into that conference room. He stopped. He was a man who did not reach for words that were not there. He waited for it. You have made me want to be worthy of you. Not as a romantic declaration, but as a daily practice. As the work of becoming the kind of person who deserves to be seen the way you see people. The way your mother looked at fabric. The way your father looked at problems, with full attention and no agenda and the simple patient expectation that if you stay with it long enough, it will tell you everything it knows. The office was entirely still. Outside Seoul moved through its Thursday, indifferent and enormous and full of its millions of private stories. The Han River held its pewter color against the November sky. Somewhere in the city, the Bayek organization was reading a filing that would in 3 days lead them to understand that their financial structure had been mapped from the outside by a woman they had tried to recruit and failed. Somewhere, Seo Yeonji was living a life that was entirely and irrevocably her own for the first time, and whatever she made of that freedom was hers alone. Nadia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I know. He blinked. It was the only fully unguarded physical response she had seen from him in 5 months. I have known for some time, she said gently. I was waiting for you to be ready, to say it. You don't say things before you are certain, and I have watched you live by that every single day, and it is one of the things I respect most about you. The small private smile appeared. The morning one. The specific one that he had been recognizing across rooms for weeks now as something that belonged only to her, and only to the moments when she was most fully herself. What I feel is the same care I have for everyone I am close to. the kitchen staff and the night guard and my brother and the junior analyst, who was still finding his footing. But it is more inhabited than that, more specific. I know you now in the way you can only know someone after you have seen them in the ordinary moments and the crisis moments and the moments in between when they don't know they are being seen. I know the morning you and the chairman, you and the Incheon boy who decided the city would not stay closed to him, and the son who kept his mother's apartment and could never tell her how. I hold all of those people with the same seriousness. That is agape, the love that does not measure, the love that does not keep a ledger or calculate a return. The love your mother had for an entire street, for people she barely knew, and for a son who was doing things she could not know about, and she loved him anyway, and the whole street came to say goodbye to her. She looked at him directly, without guard and without management. That is what I have. It is the only thing I have ever been able to offer anyone, and I believe it is honestly the most real version of what love is supposed to be. He sat with this. He let it arrive and land and stay without reaching for it or qualifying it or trying to fit it into any framework he already possessed. He had spent his entire life in a world where the truest things were always the most carefully concealed, where honesty was a liability, and openness was a vulnerability, and love was a transaction waiting to reveal its terms. Here was something completely true and completely unhidden and offered without terms, and it was the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever said to him. Not because it was a declaration, but because it was exactly and structurally and precisely true, and he could feel the truth of it the way you feel the truth of things that don't need defending. That is more than enough, he said. I know, she said. That is why I gave it. He stood and crossed to the window with his hands in his pockets and the tattoos vivid against the pale November light. The dragon coiled and the tiger mid-leap and all the ink of a life written in the only language that had always been honest with him. He looked at Seoul for a moment, then he turned around. The Bayek organization will move again, he said. When they find the mapping analysis, they'll know it came from inside. They'll come back harder than before. I know. I need you here for that, not just as a reviewer. He searched for the word, and she watched him search, and she found she loved. In the agape way and the specific inhabited way, the way he refused to reach for a word that wasn't exactly right. As someone I trust, he said, completely. In the way that word is supposed to mean and almost never does. I'm already here, she said. He nodded once the way he confirmed things that were decided and would not be revisited. He picked up the Bayek organization analysis and his phone and made the first of what would be over the following weeks a series of calls that would restructure the Heron Syndicate's defenses around the intelligence Nadia had built, closing the access points Yanji had engineered and mapping the counter-strategy and sending a message that arrived at the Bayek organization without a single word being spoken and was received completely and clearly as the message it was. We know your structure, and we know your pressure points, and we are no longer blind. Nadia returned to her office. She opened the Goryeo dynasty history. Outside her window, Seoul held its November light. The bookshelves were half full. She had plans for the other half. The door between their offices was open. In the office next door, Kang Jun-ho, chairman of the Heron Syndicate and billionaire and the most feared man in 3 industries across 2 countries, sat at his desk, knowing that 10 feet away through an open door, a woman from Kumasi was reading about medieval Korean trade routes with a cup of tea, going cold at her elbow and a pencil behind her ear, and no particular awareness of what she had done to the architecture of everything. She did not need to know. This was the nature of agape. It does not require an audience, and it does not require reciprocation in equal measure. It requires only showing up every morning with the same quality of attention and the same absence of accounting and trusting that the people it touches will carry something of it forward. She had carried it into him. He was already carrying it outward, into the way he looked at his staff. And the junior analyst still finding his confidence, and the security guard who had worked 11 years and never been asked his opinion. Small things, invisible things, the kind that don't appear on balance sheets and don't make the news and are in the long run the only things that last. He had begun to believe something his mother had known and he had spent 23 years dismantling. That the most powerful thing in the world is not the thing that makes others afraid. It is the thing that makes them feel for the first time or the first time in a long time that they are seen. That they are enough. that someone in their world has looked at them completely and found nothing to use. Nadia Owusu had walked into his conference room in a housekeeper's uniform with lemon solution on her hands, and she had looked at him completely and found nothing to use. That was the whole story. An empire nearly stolen and successfully defended. A betrayal mapped and dismantled. A man who had been building walls for 23 years, finding in a shared library in the evenings that he had quietly stopped. In the office on the 31st floor, a woman turned a page. In the office next door, a man picked up his phone and said, "I need your honest assessment, not the one you think I want." He paused. "I have someone who will verify your work. Her name is Nadia. You'll be hearing from her." He ended the call. Through the open door, he could hear faintly the sound of a page turning. He went back to work. The door stayed open. Not that day only and not the next, but in all the days that followed, days full of work and legal arguments and the Bayek organization's third and most serious attempt to find a way in, which they did not find, because Nadia's structural analysis had mapped every door they owned and Jun-ho had closed them systematically, one by one, like a man who had finally been given a complete blueprint of the building he had been defending blind. The days were full of difficulty and ordinary things and the specific unquantifiable richness of being known by someone who makes no use of what they know, which is in the end the only definition of love that has ever held up under examination. Not a feeling declared, but a practice sustained, a choice made every morning in a kitchen that smells of coffee and the beginning of another day by two people who had arrived at each other by routes that made no sense until they did, and who understood without needing to say it because some truths are stable enough not to require regular confirmation that what they had was real in the only way that real means anything. He had begun in those days to carry something different. Not lighter because his life was not lighter and his empire was not simpler and the city was not less demanding of everything he had. But different in the way that a load is different when it is properly balanced, when the weight is distributed across the whole of you rather than concentrated in the places where you are most likely to break. He caught himself doing things he had not done before, staying an extra 5 minutes in a conversation with the junior analyst to hear the end of an opinion rather than interrupting at the point where the useful information had been delivered. Asking the night security guard, whose name was Park Sung-jin, which Jun-ho now knew because Nadia had mentioned it in passing once with the easy familiarity of someone for whom other people's names were worth knowing, what he thought about the new logistics software the building was trialing. Small things, invisible things, the kind that do not appear on any document or alter any balance sheet and are quietly and permanently the only things that build the kind of life worth having. He was not doing them to be a better person. He was doing them because he had been shown by someone who did them without calculation what it felt like from the receiving end. And it turned out that being seen fully and without agenda and without the specific exhaustion of being managed was the most sustaining thing a person could experience. He had spent 23 years making himself powerful enough that no one could afford to look away from him. He was now for the first time trying to be worth looking at for an entirely different reason. His mother would have recognized this. He was fairly certain she would have. She had known it all along and had operated on it daily in a laundry in Incheon with no power and no assets and a son she loved without terms, and had tried in the years she had with him to show him. He had been too young and then too busy and then too armored to receive it. But it turned out that the lesson had been filed somewhere inside him in the part of the mind where things that are learned before you know you are learning them are stored, and it had waited there, patient and unchanged and as accurate as the day it was placed, for the right person to hand him the key. Nadia Owusu had walked into his building in a housekeeper's uniform with lemon solution on her hands. She had seen him completely. She had found nothing to use. And she had stayed anyway every morning with the same quality of attention and the same absence of accounting, until the man who had been afraid of that exact thing for 23 years had learned slowly and permanently not to be. That was the whole story. In the office on the 31st floor, a woman turned a page. In the office next door, a man ended a call, and through the open door he could hear faintly the sound of a page turning. He went back to work. The door stayed open. The Bayek organization is not finished. And now they know exactly who Nadia is. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear that genuine love asks for nothing in return. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next chapter is coming, and when the enemy moves on, Nadia directly, you will not want to find out what happens from someone else.